Top of the morning to you. Here we are, Chapter 9, Lesson 1. We're going to be taking a look at the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s. In particular, we're going to be a couple of things. And those things that we're going to be taking a look at here include what's going to be taking place and what's causing changes in economics. And what you're going to see here then is you're going to see how the Roaring Twenties made us overconfident. And so what you're going to see here in terms of what that means is when you're overconfident, you're going to make mistakes. And so you're going to see problems in the economies of the United States by us making mistakes. And the mistakes that we're going to be talking about, at least two of them are listed here: buying on the margin in bull markets. And the other thing we're going to be taking a look at here is risk. And risk can cause changes in stock markets when people make questionable decisions, when people buy things that they really shouldn't buy and take, unfortunate risks with other people's money. And you can see that we're going to be doing that here when we take a look at investor purchases and banks making bad loans. So that's the plan anyway, and we'll see how that goes. And the first thing I want you to realize here is that economic collapse that's going to happen here, and we're going to see that occur. We're going to see an economic collapse occur in 1929. And it's unthinkable. Kind of like the way in our, when you just don't see something at all and you're blindsided by it, right? And it comes out of nowhere and you just don't even expect it at all. Well, that blindsided or being blindsided is what's going to happen to our country. Because let's not forget, folks, we've come out of the Roaring Twenties, right? Where our economy was going great, where if you happened to be a white male, you were doing fantastic. So when we're running for president here right before the collapse in 1929, in that 1928 election, when Republican Herbert Hoover says, I'm going to continue that policy of laissez-faire economics, when he says, I'm going to continue those policies of prosperity that have helped so many people, including, right, those most white middle-class voters, because let's not forget, right, we keep black people from voting using poll taxes and other things like that. So when he takes credit for this, people will say, you know what, you're right. It is the Republican Party. It is laissez-faire economics that has helped us be successful for so long. And when he runs on that, I had to take a sip of my Gatorade right there. When he runs on that, he's going to win. He's going to win big. So what does that mean? And what does that look like as far as we're concerned? As far as we're concerned, that means that the stock market is going to do very, very well. One of the things that people do when they have a lot of money is they invest. I'll change the color up of that. That's hard to see. They invest. And you invest in the stock market. And that system for buying and selling stocks, it's a system that for the most part it makes sense. So, for example, what I mean there is that before the late 1920s, between 1920 to, say, 1926 or so, give or take, the stock price that you would buy in a company, so, for example, if you bought this stock here in the Findlay Mining Company, that stock generally reflects a company's true value. Now, remember, right, there's something to remember here. That's that a stock is part of a company that you buy. Remember, you buy stock shares from a company. The company gets your money and spreads the risk to its shareholders, and you will end up seeing, if the stock does well, its value going up on the market, so that when you sell it back to someone else, you're going to make a profit. So the idea here always is to buy low and sell high. That's the idea. Every stock you buy, no matter what company it's in or when you buy it, you want to buy it when it's low and you want to sell it when it's high. So that's the plan. That's the idea anyway. Buy it when it's low, sell it when it's high. So in the late 1920s, right, the people are going to be buying these stocks. They're going to be hoping their company does well. So it's going to be becoming more profitable when you sell it back on the market. And this occurs over 6 or 7 years. So between like 1929, 1924, 1925, the stock prices are going to go up, 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 and up. So it's like the market keeps going up, 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 up. The profits go up, up, up over time. And that idea of a long rise in the stock market, so let's say here it is in 1923, and then it goes all the way up to 1929, that kind of a long rise in stocks, that's known as a bull market. And you can see it down here, a bull market. So when the market is raging upwards like an out-of-control bull, people get really excited because you can make money pretty easily, because no matter what stock you buy, it's probably going to go up because everyone thinks the market's going to be doing well. That leads to lots of investors becoming what we'll call speculators, and that's important to know. A speculator is someone who buys a stock who doesn't care about the value. A speculator is someone who's going to bet the stock goes up because the market is doing well, not the company. For example, you buy stock in, I don't know, Amazon in 1923, and it goes up, 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 up. You don't care how good Amazon is doing. Amazon could be the worst company in the world, but if there's a bull market and the stock prices are rising year after year after year, Amazon's stocks are probably going to go up over time. The odds are with your favor. The hope here is that as the market keeps going, these investors can make a quick profit. That's what a speculator does. They buy hoping to make a quick profit. This becomes dangerous when people really start to gamble by borrowing money. It's called buying stocks on the margin. You make, as a speculator, a small cash down payment on the stock. So let's say that Amazon stock costs $20. Well, you only put down $5. And the bank, in a loan, puts up the other 15. So you own that stock, but you own it on a loan, right? As long as that stock goes up, you're going to do well and everything will be okay. Here's a little slide to show you what I mean. I have $5, right? Step one, I have $5, and I'm going to borrow that $20 from the bank, and I'm going to buy that stock for $25. So I've only provided a small down payment, the $5. The banks put up the rest. Ideally, the stock price rises, right, because it's a bull market. So I'm betting that the stock price is going to rise. I'm going to make a quick profit. I'm going to sell that stock when it hits $30. I'm going to repay my loan of $20 plus interest. So I'm going to repay $22. Right? So 30 minus 22 is 8. Now, I started out with $5. So 8 minus 5 equals a profit of $3. And as long as the stock goes up, then you're making money. And borrowing that money from the bank makes perfect sense. Because I borrowed 20, I made $3, now I can do it all over again. Now I've got $8 to start with, I can borrow 20 more, and so on down the line. People really attempt to use this buying on the margin to make that quick pay, or that quick profit. Of course, what happens if the market doesn't go up, right? And that's what people have to think about long term. That day of when the market no longer continues to go up, that day when the bull market comes to an end, that's going to happen in October of 1920. 1929. And in October of 1929, investors are going to realize that there's way too many people in the stock market, way too many people trying to play the market. In fact, people are so jazzed up on the market that they're actually camping out on the streets and in buildings nearby in the lobbies to be the first people into the market to get access to those stocks and to make a quick profit. That's going to start investors to sell. Well, you know what happens, right? When you have something in terms of supply and price, right? When the supply of something goes up, the price is going to fall. So that as investors begin dumping more and more stocks onto the market, they're selling that stocks, trying to make a profit. The supply of those stocks in the market is going to increase, but people aren't going to want to buy. So demand is going away. Supply is going up as demand is going down. This is not good because the price is going to plummet. $30 billion lost. $30 billion. This was one of the main causes of the Great Depression, which lasts from 1929 to approximately 1940, give or take. But it's not the sole cause. But it's a big, big problem because when you take $30 billion out of our economy, and what happens then, right? I need you to remember something important, and that was supply side economics, okay? And that looked like cutting taxes first, right, with supply side economics. People are going to spend more money because they have more in their pockets because you cut taxes. Because you did that, factories are going to have to produce more. Because factories are producing more and selling more, they can raise your pay. You pay more in taxes at the lower rate. You spend more money. Factories produce more, and it goes around and around and around. But, as we just said, if this isn't going to work, right? If $30 billion is lost in the stock market crash, well, then we've got a problem. Because with that $30 billion is gone, people aren't going to be able to spend more money, right? People aren't going to be able to do that at all. And if people can't spend more money, well, then factories are going to have a tough time producing anything at all. And if they can't produce anything at all, they're certainly not going to be able to raise your pay. And all of a sudden, the economy, or at least supply side economics, is going to be blank and empty. It's a big, big problem. And we're going to talk more about that problem in a little bit. For now, though, I want to stick to some of the repercussions of the actual crash itself in October of 1929. In particular, I want you to realize one of the most catastrophic after effects of this collapse, and that's going to be banks collapsing. Think about this. Let's take it from the very beginning. Step one, you and me, we go into a bank, we deposit our money. Check. Step two, that bank wants to make money on our money. They want to profit, right? So they're going to make loans to speculators in the 1920s that they're going to repay back with interest. Ideally, the bank makes money when the loan is repaid. But when the stock market crashes, banks are going to panic because speculators can't repay their loans. Remember, the stock market is falling so fast because there is absolutely no demand, and everyone is trying to sell their stocks at the same time, creating a ridiculously high supply. So when you have that high supply and no demand, that price is really, really low. Speculators can barely sell their stocks. They're certainly not going to be able to repay their loans. So when banks panic, they're going to issue what you can see here as called a margin call. And a margin call is the idea that you have to repay immediately your loans. Speculators can't do that. When the speculators can't repay their money, the speculators are going to go bankrupt. But the banks lose all that money they loaned out. So think about it like a great big pot of money, right? And if you have this great big pot of money, right, that investors deposit in your bank, and you come along and you loan out part of that money, right? And that money gets loaned out to speculators somewhere over here. But then all of a sudden, even though you've loaned out all that money to speculators to make a profit on it, when the market crashes, they can't repay you. And you're left with not as much money as you started. And that's a bad thing for a bank. When customers of banks panic themselves and start bank runs, people start lining up at the banks. They start lining up. Here's a little person lining up and another one, right? And they line up at the bank and they begin to withdraw their money. And the more and more people that withdraw their money at the same time, well, that bank is going to collapse. What this leads to is at the time of the stock market crash, since the government didn't insure our bank deposits, when the banks collapse, we're the ones that lose our savings. The speculators go bankrupt, the banks go bankrupt, and we lose our savings. 1 out of every 4 banks is going to close by 1932. That's a lot of banks. 25% in only 3 years. So, all of this doesn't really explain why the average person was hurt. I mean, yes, 1 out of every 4 banks closes. That's a bad thing. That's 1 out of every 4 Americans losing their savings. That's a problem, for sure. And yeah, the speculators have lost all that money. That $30 billion is gone in the stock market. But what about everything else that would have led to this, what we call a Great Depression? Part of the problem is not just that we had speculators on a bull market buying on the margin and then unable to repay. Part of the problem is that a small number of households make most of our income. This number right here, the top 5% of all Americans earned 30% of our income. So if you had 100 people lined up right along here, pretend that's 100 people, the top 5% or 5 people would make 30% of every dollar made in America. And everyone else would have to share what was left. That means that most Americans, everybody else that's on that, or in America, we don't have the money to keep buying the stuff that we need to in order for supply-side economics to work. People need to buy on credit, right? Remember that in the 1920s? People felt confident, and so they started to consume on credit. That's dangerous because you have to pay it off sooner or later. So when you see people paying off their debt, especially when people start to panic, banks start to close, people don't want to have debt, people take their money out of the economy and they start paying off that debt. So they're no longer buying goods. So not only did the very wealthy take $30 billion out of the economy when the stock market crashed and all that money was lost, at the same time, the average person is pulling a lot of money out of the economy to pay off their debt. Add into that overproduction, another key cause of the Great Depression, because companies didn't respond fast enough to people not buying goods. An example would be automobiles. So you make cars, right? Well, if you make cars, let's have a little car here, right? There's the little car. If you make cars, right, and demand falls for those cars, you're going to produce less. So if you say, all right, you know what, demand falls for cars, so I'm not going to make this car, let's get rid of that car because demand is falling, all of a sudden, you don't need all that steel. Here's a little I-beam, right? Little I-beam. Running back there, little I-beam or something. I don't know how to even draw that in perspective. You don't need all that steel, right? You don't need all that plastic or glass for windshields or anything else, right? You just don't need the surprise. Rubber for the tires. You don't need any of that stuff anymore. There's no purpose for it. So other things needed to make those products also see a decline. Now understand that. As demand falls for things like steel, rubber, plastic, and glass, those factories, they don't need all those workers or those high wages for those they keep. This is going to result in poorer Americans because those wages are going to be cut by all the companies around the country, and you're going to have unemployed Americans because there's not a demand for all of these goods and materials and supplies. This is going to lead to yet another problem or another kind of cycle. Let me show you what I mean. Here's exactly what I talked about. Automobile sales falling, need for these supplies falls, especially things like steel and rubber. Industry is going to slow, so we cut wages, we lay people off. That means people aren't going to have the money to buy automobiles, which means sales are going to continue to decline, which leads to even less demand for textiles, oil, and steel. It's going to slow industry even more. You're going to have to cut more wages, lay more people off. There'll be even less demand. You're stuck in a cycle. And the only way out of this cycle is if someone starts buying. And we'll see how that will play out in a little bit. But we're not there yet because there's two other big problems that lead to the Great Depression of the 1930s, and that's our government screwing up. In particular, the Federal Reserve, which is a bank that we had talked about in Washington, D.C., the Federal Reserve kept interest rates low. Now, when interest rates are low and you take out a loan, that means the interest that you have to pay is going to be lower. So instead of taking a loan out on $20 and having to repay back, I don't know, $28, $8 in interest, instead, you're only going to have to pay back $22 in interest, right? So this is going to encourage speculators to buy stocks on the margin because interest rates are so low. The average person can afford to take out these loans. That's dangerous, especially, when the market crashes, people aren't going to be able to pay up, they're going to go bankrupt, and they're not going to be able to buy goods. In response to this, right, in the and not just this issue, but to other issues, we know that supply-side economics kind of relies on people buying goods, staying in their jobs, etc. So Congress is going to want to help people and encourage people to buy American, keep them buying American goods, keep them in the jobs, keep the cycle going. So it's going to pass the Hawley-Smoot tariff to keep people and encourage people to buy American. But what we don't realize is that when a tariff war erupts and as stock prices decline, the Hawley-Smoot tariff is going to lead to a decline in exports. So just as America's production is too high, remember we said overproduction is a problem, they're not going to be able to sell to other countries because America's stuck in a tariff war. You add that to that fuel to the fire, and it's going to create that lower demand, lay people off, lower wages, and the supply side cycle is going to be broken. So there you have it, a summary of all of the stuff we've talked about, and we'll see how it plays out in class. And I think if we had to summarize this, if I had to bring it all together, I think you could say that we've got confidence. In fact, too much. We're overconfident because of the Roaring Twenties and everyone making money. So we take risks. We speculate. We make bad loans as banks. And when that panic strikes, everyone's going to suffer. The system is going to get broken. The cycle is going to reverse itself. And then the government's mistakes with interest rates and tariffs keep us from becoming prosperous. So there you go. There's 9.1, and we'll do more with this in class.